Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I reject most of the commercial property deals. That's right, you heard it right, that I reject almost 80% commercial deals that we come across. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I do these things. If you want to know, then stick around. Alright, as you know, my name is Soumen Mondal. I am a commercial buyer agent and I buy commercial properties. Just to give you an idea, the last 6 months I bought about 30 million worth of commercial real estate and we have been buying these aggressively. So yeah, it's to give you that I have been seeing a lot of deals as well. So the first reason that we reject a deal is the cash flow. If we see the deal and if you see the return is way too low, in other words like 3% or 4% net return, which is still better than the residential, but still we have a benchmark, and if it is not in that benchmark, then we say no, we are not buying this. So again, it depends on person to person, but I would not buy a deal which is like 3 to 4% return, because commercial property is all about high cash flow and positive cash flow, higher return. And why would I buy a 3% deal, a 3% net return, where I get, even in my bank is giving me 4.5% of my money like a return? So I would not buy this, and that is one of the reasons that we reject it. That's the number one. The second reason that we would reject a deal if it is that outgoings are not paid by the tenant. Now, outgoings, as you know, this is all about council rate, insurance, land tax, management fees. These are all outgoings. If these outgoings are paid by the landlord, then I really need a very high return, like 8-9% return. But if the return is like, let's say 5 or 6%, and it's on top of that, these outgoings would be paid by the landlord, is where we will reject a deal. We would not buy a deal, we would not buy a property where we see that the gross return is only 5 or 6%, which means the net return will come down to around 3-4%, is something that we would not buy. Now again, this is our principle or our philosophy of buying a high cash flow, and which is what cash flow becomes significantly low because the outgoings is paid by the landlord, is the deal that we'll stay away from. The third reason that we are going to reject a deal is that if the maintenance of that property, whose responsibility is this, could be a make and break for us as well. Because if a property which is a lot of maintenance and that maintenance is on landlord responsibility, is something that we would not buy, we would reject it. And particularly if the lease is long term. If the lease is short term and we know that later on we can change the lease, and that is different, that we know that okay, we are maybe hitting like a short term hit, but the long term we can include that and the tenant is going to pay all these things, something that we might consider. But if it is a long term lease and the maintenance responsibilities on landlord, is something that we would reject, particularly if the return is like neck to neck, like 5% or 6% return, but the maintenance will be paid by the landlord. Again, overall the net rent is going to come down. Is this kind of deals we are going to stay away from. The next reason that we would reject a deal, if there is a multiple tenancy. So in other words, one big property, it has multiple tenancy, we might reject the deal if the return again is low. So if we have multiple tenancies, just a rule of thumb is that managing a single tenant versus managing multiple tenants is always more task, more work. But if you want to do more work, so you want to get compensated, you want to get paid. So that's why general rule of thumb is that one tenancy would be little less rent as compared to multiple tenancies. Now if the multiple tenancy and the single tenancy both rent are almost similar, why would you buy multiple tenancy where you can buy a single tenant? Now you could also argue with me that if the single tenant moves out, then the rent will be zero. On the other side, multiple tenancy, one tenant moves out, you still get 70-80% of the rent. That's right, that is how we need to understand what we are buying, where we are buying, and what kind of property that we are buying. Even with single tenancy, in other words, like if we know it's very demanding and the tenant is doing the business, they're not going to move out. So sometimes we reject the deal if it is like multiple tenancy but the return is significantly low, because multiple tenancy maintenance is a lot of work and your management fees would be little higher, because there is a common area management. If it is a strata title property, that has other complications. So we need to make sure that we get compensated, so the return needs to be significantly higher for a multiple tenancy properties. If it is not, then we would reject the deal. The last but not the least is that how long is the lease, which is also known as WALE, WALE, weighted average lease expiry. Now if this lease, sometimes if we see if the lease is long term, which is 5 years, 7 years, now 5-7 years is such a long time, we would always go and buy for it just on the term that basis. On the other side, if the lease is left only 1 years, although the lease is written 5 years and the last year the current owner, the vendor is selling, we need to look into that why they are selling, and the reason because they sense it that the tenant is going to move out is something that we would stay away from. We would not buy that property. Why? Because if the tenant moves out, then within a year or so, then you bought the property, because when you are buying the property you need to pay stamp duty, you need to pay the other costs, so you would expect at least next 2-3 years you have a predictable stable cash flow. But if that is not the case, if within a year if the tenant moves out, then you will have the vacancy, is something that risk we would not take. So we would reject a deal just on that basis, which is like the property has been tenanted for the last 5 years, but in the last 1 year of the lease left, vendor is selling, and during due diligence we put together, we found out that the tenant is planning to move out, is something that we'll stay away from. We would look different deal, we would not do this. Now which one is your favorite? Because there are many other reasons that you will be rejecting a deal, and as I said, 80% of the deals, because we revise a lot of deals, it comes to our desk, we check and we said no, we are not buying this, no, we are not buying this, and then we get yes. So you have to get lot of no's, lot of rejections before you get that acceptance. You don't expect that you just look for one deal and all of a sudden that property you will be buying, because then for sure you are either overpaying or you don't know, you are ignoring a lot of things. You need to look into overall view and decide whether you want to go ahead or not. Sometimes better to create your own deal profile, and from there you look for deals, so that way you can minimize all these noises and those properties you do not buy. I hope you got some idea about how to filter those, what are the things that we look into. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe this channel so you get to see more videos like this, and whenever I post a video and you get the notification straight away. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.